Greetings, science fiction and fantasy enthusiasts. Do you read books? Do you watch films? Do you hate deodorant? Then welcome to our podcast. You're listening to No Deodorant in Outer Space with Ryan Sean O'Reilly. Now, let's get started.
I know I've made some very poor decisions recently, but I can give you my complete assurance that my work will be back to normal. I've still got the greatest enthusiasm and confidence in the mission, and I want to help you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of No Deodorant in Outer Space. My name is Ryan Sean O'Reilly, and I am joined once again by Richard Bacon.
Hey Ryan, I'm excited to be here. I'm glad to be a part about this project, and let's get going.
All right, and also John Doyle, a.k.a. Dole.
Hi, Ryan.
Are you less excited to be here?
I am excited to be here.
We are, of course, discussing 2001: A Space Odyssey, the movie. We previously covered the book in the last episode, and so this is our follow-up. Let's do things correctly, and let me start off the show with all of us giving sort of an opening comment to summarize our thoughts about this movie, like a single sentence kind of idea. It can be a run-on sentence, how Rick used to do it, whatever you want to do. So I'll start things off, and my kind of general impression of this movie is it's an ode to space travel and mankind's cosmic destiny, and takes painstaking attention to scientific detail with deft poetic breath and all-around general sense of contemplative bewilderment and awe. All right. Rich, you're giving me a look with your eyebrows. Let's go to you next.
2001: A Space Odyssey is a cinematic masterpiece, a must-see for anyone who wants to appreciate serious films.
Wow, he didn't even read that one.
I liked that one. I liked it. Oh, man. 2001: Space Odyssey for me is it's mind-blowing. It's so influential on any sci-fi film ever since created. I don't know. That's about as much as I can say about it.
Okay, fair enough. Again, we are talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey, so let's get into the biography portion of the show. I'll give a little background on the director, Stanley Kubrick. Now, we previously covered Stanley Kubrick when we did A Clockwork Orange, very, very early on. I think it might have been our second episode on the podcast. I'd have to check, but I'll put a link for it. So we talked about Kubrick's background. I think Wilk did a little bit, and people can refer back to that if they want to hear some more background on Kubrick. And Wilk was a huge fan of Kubrick and still is. But I'll give an overview, and hopefully it's not too repetitive of what we talked about in the past. I found on YouTube someone had put together, and I don't know if this was a YouTube thing or just a video that was put on YouTube. It's called Stanley Kubrick, The Lost Tapes, and these were like early audio interviews of Kubrick. And people had put together like a montage of like photos and stuff to go with it. It was really good, and I think it wasn't too long. I don't know if I sent the link to you guys, but it kind of gave a real overview of his life, sort of leading up to the time when he made 2001. Kubrick, from what I saw, and they said in this documentary, was where he said himself, I guess, in this documentary, he was not a great student. I think he had like average grades. He failed English once and had to make it up in summer school. This was, I guess, post-war era, and if you didn't have great grades, the idea that you go on to higher education was pretty much not going to happen, so you had to figure out what you were going to do. So he started to read. I think I believe his dad was a physician, and his dad encouraged him to read, and he started reading a lot after high school, and he felt that he probably caught up to his more educated peers just through his own like reading alone. That reminds me of another author, Pratchett. I think Pratchett was a huge reader as well. I mean, probably a lot of authors are. Well, Kubrick wasn't an author, he was a filmmaker, but in any case, he got into photography around this time as well, and I know his father encouraged him to do that and to take it seriously as more than just like a casual pursuit or hobby. Kubrick eventually started working for Look magazine. That was like one of his first jobs as a professional, and he said that photography helped him independently developed like sort of a generalized approach to problem solving that would benefit him later in life. And I'm sure learning about cameras ended up benefiting him as a filmmaker too. At some point, a friend of his mentioned a documentary called March of Time, and he found out that the documentary cost about $45,000 to make. because I guess of his knowledge, whatever, working with cameras and stuff, he started like calling places and finding out like, you know, what it would cost to do these different elements of putting a film together, like editing and sound and all these things. And he figured he could do a documentary in only like $3,500. So it gave him an idea like, oh, if these studio people are doing it for $45,000 and I can do the same thing for $3,500, I should do it. And I'm going to make like tons of money. This is going to be a great new career for me. So he gets all into film. He later finds out, you know, there's more to it than that. And he ends up selling his first documentary, which he did about a boxer, to RKO Studios, which is a famous studio. I think we mentioned it on another podcast. But he ends up selling it for about $100 loss. It got nationwide distribution, but it didn't develop in any further work for him, as he had hoped. In 1953, he made the film Fear and Desire, which I think was essentially an anti-war film. He did this without any experience of working with actors, but it did have like action sequences, I believe, and it had like a little success. Kubrick, another thing he did, I don't know if we mentioned this before, but he was a big chess player. I think he also was part of chess organizations. And he would often go to the park and play chess for quarters or at some chess clubs while he was waiting for answers on like his projects and stuff. Sometimes he'd be there from like noon to midnight just playing chess. And I think chess features in a lot of his films. And it was in this film, if you notice, the astronauts are playing chess at some point because he was a chess player and loved playing chess. And I think he said it helped with his own decision-making, help him be more thoughtful in how to make decisions. In 1957, he reads Paths of Glory and he co-writes a script with someone. And they didn't have any interest to move forward with the project until their agent got Kirk Douglas involved. And that's how they were kind of able to move forward with that once Kirk Douglas got involved. In 1960, Kirk Douglas, I think, Rich, we were talking about this earlier before our podcast, Kirk Douglas's production company was making the movie Spartacus. Because Douglas or someone was having disagreements with that director they hired, within a week of starting filming on Spartacus, they fire that director and they got to get someone else. And because Kirk Douglas had worked with Kubrick previously and I guess liked him, he hired Kubrick on to help finish that film, or basically start filming it. The previous director was actually Anthony Mann. Spartacus cost about $12 million and it made $60 million. It was a big film and it showed the studios that Kubrick can handle like these big films. I think that was, his first big Hollywood film, and it was a real landmark film for him.
That's just a landmark film.
Yeah. So then, but what I'm getting is like this puts him on the map and lets studios trust him. Like, look at what he was able to do.
Right.
So his career is taking off now. And in 1962, he made Lolita, despite pressures against it from various groups. He wasn't happy about it. It cost about $2 million to make, but it made about $9 million, $9.25. I think Peter Sellers was in that, wasn't he?
I don't think so. No, he's not in that film.
No.
Okay.
I forget the main characters.
Google that right now. I'll move on. 1964, he starts getting worried about being blown up by the H-bomb, and he reads a lot about this topic. And he eventually makes a movie, Dr. Strangelove, and that was also a huge success, both commercially and critically.
James Mason. So that has
but
nothing.
Is Peter Sellers in the movie at all? As one of the actors?
No, but Gary Cockrell is.
Isn't it Jerry?
Ooh, Lois Maxwell, who would end up being Miss Moneypenny in most of the rest of the James Bonds. Let's see who else we got here. Shirley Douglas.
I thought he had worked with Sellers before. No, I could be wrong.
No, but, now that he's worked with Kirk Douglas and James Mason, that's both the stars from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So you should probably...
The Disney one?
The Disney one, which I think you didn't you do a podcast on that?
Yes, we did.
There you go.
So he makes Dr. Strangelove. It's a huge success. It had a $1.8 million budget. It makes almost $9.5 million.
It says that Peter Sellers was in the film.
Okay, I got that from somewhere. Maybe it was from Wikipedia. Maybe it's wrong.
But he's obviously not the main.
Well, he's not really listed here in the oh wait, there he is he's third from the bottom. You know who else was in that movie? Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee.
Wow.
Christopher Lee, who was in Devil Rides Out. Which
By the way, Peter Cushing was playing Dr. Frankenstein, and Christopher Lee was playing Frankenstein's monster.
That's pretty typical. Both of them always played the monsters.
Especially in the 60s, but that was in Hammer horror films. I wonder if they went to go see one and they had those guys playing it just for the heck of it.
Probably.
Anyway.
But because I thought that's how he ended up casting Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangelove, because he had worked with him previously.
It must have been.
Yeah.
It must have been.
I never realized he was in that film.
Yeah. When they're third from the bottom, you generally, don't consider them as in the film, I guess.
Yeah, but it created a relationship. This week, after I watched 2001, I watched Paths of Glory and Dr. Strangelove. Those are both great movies. I think you guys have seen those movies too, right?
I haven't seen Paths of Glory, but...
Oh, Paths of Glory is excellent. Great movie.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah. it focused less on the war than I thought it would. It was like kind of like war a lot in the beginning, and then it focuses more on like this trial kind of thing.
No, it's purely the moral implications.
Yeah.
Especially, which when coming to World War I is generally, especially since we're on the 100th anniversary here. If you don't realize it, of course, in next weekend will be the 100th anniversary of the armistice. So, of course, November 11th. But yeah, that
the way they talk about just throwing bodies at these objectives they have.
Literally, the generals who would never go to the front lines but expect everyone else to show unwavering, bravery and such, with their impossible orders.
And Dr. Strangelove deals with, fears going on with the Cold War and nuclear. And I think it ends up informing the next film a little bit because, how he changed the ending. Because he didn't want the ending of 2001 to be like how he ended Dr. Strangelove, which is why I think he changed it from the way that Clarke had it in the book.
Right, with everyone getting nuked. Right, I win. Yes. No.
Well, right. I think even Roger Ebert was quoted on the Wikipedia as noting that Kubrick had filmed bombing platforms in space, but decided in the final cuts to not show them or say what they were.
In 2001, you mean?
In 2001, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I think he didn't want, because he did a nuclear explosion at the end of, not to spoil Dr. Strangelove, which is an old enough film, but he ended that film with a nuclear explosion. So he
didn't want the same.
Yeah, he thought it'd be too repetitive.
Interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, it's something that I saw. So, that is the next film he makes. He liked working with people on scripts because of time pressures. He wanted to make, the quote was, the proverbial good science fiction movie. He had taken some interest in doing this after seeing Japanese films, like I forget how, I don't know how you pronounce this, but they're like the Godzilla movies and stuff, like those types of films.
Oh, yeah.
He was impressed with the sets and the lighting, the photography, what they were able to do in color. He didn't care for some of the other elements, but he thought that was all very impressive, and it sort of inspired him to want to do a really good science fiction movie. In looking for a collaborator, he found that Arthur C. Clarke, was the most poetic sci-fi writer and scientifically well-informed science fiction writer that managed to capture mankind's hopeless desire to know the unknowable and reach for obtainable sense of sadness. What happened was they had a mutual acquaintance that suggested that Kubrick work with Clarke. He initially, when he learned about Clarke was living in Sri Lanka at this time, so he thought Clarke was like a reclusive nut who lived in a tree. But this guy who knew Clarke was like, just work with him. So they reached out and they decided to work together. They met in New York City in 1964. So Kubrick is coming off of his success from Dr. Strangelove, and he's looking for his next project, and he's on, cloud nine. They meet and discuss. Originally, Kubrick wanted to do Childhood's End, but that book was already optioned by someone else. So they didn't have the rights. They couldn't do it.
They've never made a film of that one, have they?
Damn it. I was looking at this the other night, and now I can't remember.
They may have. I don't know.
Because there's another famous book of his that Morgan Freeman has optioned that they just haven't been able to get a script completed for. And I think there might be something for Childhood Ends. I can probably tell you that in a minute.
That's all right. I was just curious.
So Clarke goes to him with 6 short stories and tells Kubrick, I have all these stories, choose what you'd like to make a movie out of. And Childhood's End. Yes, it was a film. Sorry. 2015, the Sci-Fi Channel looks like might have made a miniseries. Any case, they decide to make one out of this short story called The Sentinel, which we talked about in the last episode. That was actually written back in 1948. That's how old it was when they were deciding to do. In regards to how to depict alien life, Kubrick actually wanted to do more of like humanoid aliens for the convenience sake for filming. But they went and sought help from famed astronomer and science fiction writer Carl Sagan, who suggested they not go that route because he thought it would kind of be false to depict aliens like that. And instead they go towards just suggesting that there's aliens out there and that they have this super intelligence without actually like showing the intelligence or the aliens and just kind of hinting at it more. And so that's the route they ended up going. Kubrick had this vision of the aliens evolving from biological entities to immortal machines and then onto beings of pure energy and spirit with limitless capabilities and ungraspable intelligence. Those are quotes I saw. We kind of got into that in the last episode of the evolution there. Clarke was originally going to write the screenplay for Kubrick, but Kubrick is the one who suggested, why don't we do a novel first and then build the script out of that? So that's how things started. I think they had collaborated on a 130-page treatment first, and then Clarke goes on to do this novel. But near the end of the novel, the novel and the screenplay were being worked on simultaneously, and both Clarke and Kubrick were providing feedback to each other Clarke in particular would provide scientific realism that Kubrick would incorporate, and in turn Kubrick had to make changes for budgetary reasons, and then Clarke would end up making changes after seeing the movie rushes. So they were both revising at the same time, if you can follow that. So Kubrick would have to cut something out because he couldn't pay for it, and then Clarke would be like, oh, I'll cut this out of the story. So, I mean, you were talking about this at the last episode a little bit, Rich, and we talked about this in Metropolis. There is tie-in books or novelizations of movies. Then there is, adaptions of books. And I think Clarke wanted this to be seen more as an adaptation, not a novelization. But in truth, this was written simultaneously as the movie, like Metropolis.
True. But I mean, let's point out, it was certainly nominated, didn't 2001: A Space Odyssey win for Oscar for Best Original Screenplay?
I know that, well, I don't know actually. I should know, but I don't know.
Well, if it's an original screenplay, then that means it's not based off of a previous work. So anyway, just one of those things. But anyway,
technical point.
These things were developed simultaneously, but there was a seminal document. I mean, there was a seminal story that they were working on.
They created a movie treatment, and then I think Clarke started the novel, and then at some point Kubrick just started working on the screenplay, and then they just started kind of cross-pollinating each other.
Sometimes reality sets in. You've got to make a movie, and the writer's over here, but look, I got to make this movie.
Yeah, I think that at some point Kubrick already passed over the point in the story that Clarke had reached. Like, Clarke finished his book after the fact.
No, Clarke finished the first draft of the novel at the end of 1964.
Yeah, but I think they were already filming.
The first draft of the novel was done in 64.
When did they start?
And we had plans of publishing it the next year ahead of the movie. However, the film went through many production delays and wasn't released until 1968, with the book not coming out actually until 4 months later, which upset Clarke, who thought that Kubrick purposely manipulated the circumstances to downplay Clarke's role in the story and make the book seem more like a novelization of the film rather than the film being an adaptation. The screenplay was supposed to be credited first to Kubrick and second to Clarke, with the inverse for the book, as befitting their separate expertise. However, the novel actually only lists Clarke, though I was actually kind of scrutinizing the Copyright Office to see who owned the copyright for the book. And if you look at your book, it says, and actually look at your edition too, it says right in the front, by Arthur C. Clarke. But if you turn to the copyright page, it's like whatever page 1, under the copyright symbol, which is copyrighted in 1968, I think it says Arthur C. Clarke and Polaris Productions, Ltd.
Right.
So I think that's Kubrick's company. So I think Kubrick owns the copyright with Clarke jointly, but they list Arthur. He gets like the credit on the book cover.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting. I couldn't find the actual copyright registration because it was before 1978 and they don't have all that digitized yet. There was actually major changes to copyright law in 1978. But in any case, the film, in Clarke, he said that probably Kubrick should have still been listed on the title or on the book. But they went through a few title iterations, but Kubrick came up with the now famous title, and he based it off of inspiration from, Homer's The Odyssey, comparing the vastness of space to the vastness of the sea. And we talked about the first part of the book being around early humans, which was based on a short story by Clarke called Encounter at Dawn, I believe. All right. And casting. Kubrick hired Daniel Richter, who was basically a street mime, who led a troupe in London to choreograph the Dawn of Man sequence, which is the man apes in the beginning. And they actually spent hours studying apes in the London Zoo to get the movements down and get away from Hollywood cliches. Because Kubrick didn't want, the typical guy in a gorilla costume. And also I heard a podcast talking about how the censors didn't want them to have they really look like apes. They don't look like human Neanderthals. Right. I think the censors didn't want...
I thought that was really effective.
The censors didn't want any kind of nudity. And this is rated G, I believe.
Is it?
I think it might be rated G.
Really?
But yeah, I thought the apes were really realistic.
Yeah, but I thought it was good because they didn't look to me directly like apes. They looked like something in between.
Yes. Yeah.
They seemed much more humanoid, but they didn't look like a costume. It looked very real.
And they also didn't just like humans with a prosthetic brow and a beard. And another interesting anecdote I saw somewhere or read somewhere or listened somewhere was that the people who were working on Planet of the Apes were so impressed with the apes that Kubrick did that they went to him and said, "How did you make these apes? Please tell us how." And he refused.
Well, they both came out in 1968.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was after they made their first film and then maybe they were thinking about
Planet of the Apes came out at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if it was afterward, when they were making future ones, they were like, hey.
I like that he did that.
He's just no. The actor who played Bowman, and actually I looked up how to pronounce his name and now I already forget. I think it was Keir Duella.
Something like that.
He later played a role in Brave New World, the film of that, and he also did the sequel to this film. Gary Lockwood played Poole. He previously played the role of Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell in the Star Trek pilot episode Where No Man Has Gone Before. Douglas Rain was cast as the voice of HAL 9000. Rain was noted by Kubrick during a viewing of a short animated documentary by the National Film Board of Canada called Universe that came out in 1960, which depicted a realistic voyage through space. Rain did the English narration on the film. Kubrick consulted with the co-director, Colin Lowe, for 2001 and invited him to work on the film. Colin declined to go work on other film obligations that were sort of a precursor to the IMAX format, though Kubrick did manage to hire Wally Gentleman, who did the optical effects on the documentary, and I think he might have also hired Sidney Goldsmith. So you got this documentary put out by a Canadian government that Kubrick thinks is really interesting and shows space and stuff, and it's on YouTube. I'll put a link to that. I watched it. It's kind of interesting, and he's like, I need these guys on my set. So Kubrick starts amassing all these experts in the field. And I think that is important for this film and why it holds up today. Because unlike other science fiction films maybe at the time, where people were just doing ray guns, and when they made a computer, they would just kind of put something together that looked like it should be technological, Like we were watching an episode of Lost in Space earlier today, and you saw a computer screen and it's just blurry or whatever, and it's not really, Kubrick was looking for experts, he was talking to people in NASA and stuff. I think at one point he went to the NASA launch of Ranger 9, a mission that was this lunar probe that was being launched just to go take pictures of the moon and land there. And they allowed him go see this probe so he could get the authenticity right. I think when we were talking about Solaris, didn't they use an actual panel on the set from Russia's space program, on their movie set? They had some authenticity to the spaceship on there.
I don't remember. I don't remember
something like that going on. But Kubrick really wanted this to be expert, and he also wanted a lot of in-camera shots, I believe.
Yeah.
He wanted to get away from animation and stuff and blue screen and things like that as much as possible. He hired illustrators to design accurate concept drawings, sketches, and paintings for the technology. One notable person I saw was an award-winning artist named Chesley Bonestall, who was an American artist who was influential in science fiction and inspired the space program, and actually did artwork for legendary films like Hunchback of Notre Dame, Only Angels Have Wings, Swiss Family Robinson, Citizen Kane, War of the Worlds, in this film. So he was right out of the gate hiring smart people that were talented that could add authenticity and realism to this. Let's see. Another thing to note, I think, is this is all going on during the space race of the 20th century between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So a lot of time and money is being pumped into these efforts, and a lot was accomplished. This is all going on, and at some point, Kubrick actually, because at this point we hadn't even been to the moon. I think we go to the moon a year later.
Right.
Kubrick actually got worried that mankind was going to go to the moon and discover aliens and ruin his film. And I remember he approached the Lloyds of London to ensure against this, but they decided not to do it. Although Carl Sagan said they should have done it because in the 1960s, his quote was, in the 1960s, there was no search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and the chances of accidentally stumbling on extraterrestrial intelligence in a few years' time period were extremely small. After the production started, Kubrick attended the 1964-65 New York World's Fair, and he saw an exhibit called To the Moon and Beyond, which is a motion picture narrated by none other than Rod Serling of Twilight Zone, which we covered an episode about Twilight Zone episodes. We talked about Charles Beaumont this season. And that featured a realistic depiction of traveling from Earth out to the universe as a whole and then back down to the atomic level again. It was a technical feat and was projected on a 96-foot high dome using a new camera process and ran hourly at the fair. And even though Kubrick had already started to work on his film, he hired people from that to work on 2001. And one of them was artist, this Trumbull guy, who worked as a special effects supervisor. So they began filming in 1965 in England. And they started with the crater sequence on the moon. And they continued filming with the actors through September of 67. And all these scenes were shot in the studio except for the scene where they throw the bone up in the air. The moon watcher guy throws the bone up in the air. Everything else was done in studio. But from 1966 to 68, Kubrick is basically focusing on special effects to get that right. He wants them to avoid using blue screen, like I was saying, and these matte effects. He's really just trying to get the special effects right. And he was editing final cuts all the way to just before the general release of the film in 1968. The budget for the film went from $4.5 million to $6 million, so it was over budget, and it came out 16 months behind schedule. Kubrick was extremely involved with all aspects of the film. He even picked out fabric for the actors' costumes, the furniture they were using. They even had detailed instructions on how to use the anti-gravity toilet, in small print that you couldn't even really see.
I know he always go to very granular levels in
Yeah.
all of his films like that.
I read this, that one of the main effects that I think they spent not quite, but almost $1 million on, they created a centrifuge on the set. They created rotating sets by making like a 30 short ton rotating Ferris wheel.
Yeah, that's how they got that one
The artificial
unique shot, like in the first opening of the space scenes when they're jogging up and down the centrifuge.
Yeah, they'd have like one actor's like walking on the bottom.
Yeah.
And they'd rotate the entire set around them. And then if they had an actor meeting another actor, they'd strap the one actor to the top.
Yeah.
And then rotate him down to the bottom one.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And okay, so you know the sequence where, and this is one of the differences from the book and the movie, right? And we can talk about this. When Hal loses he goes crazy. Who is it? Poole is out there.
Right.
To fix the antenna thing.
Yep.
And then they show the pod coming at him, and
right.
the next thing we know, he's flying through space, and Bowman sees this, and Bowman goes out there, and unlike the book, Bowman goes out to try to rescue.
Yeah, he doesn't rescue him, but he gets the body.
Does he think that? Do you guys think that he thought Bowman or Poole was alive?
I think so. I think he was going to try and rescue him, brought him to the pod bay doors, and he asked Hal to open them up. He refused to, and then at some point he just gives up and lets go of the body.
Yeah.
There's also the traditional man overboard response. I mean, you've got your colleague is drifting off into space.
Right.
You got to go see.
Yeah, you're not allowed to go, well, there it goes. See you, Frank.
Because he doesn't know
right.
if he's dead.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But he is already dead by that point.
I thought that the tension that Kubrick used in that sequence was more effective than the book. I think he took Clarke's idea, hey, this is the tense, or
whoever's idea was, we don't even know how.
Yeah, I mean, it may very well have been Kubrick's, who knows, but he took that and then he pushed it to its envelope. It was like, and that's very typical of Kubrick. Like, he will take an idea and he will push it to its furthest pinnacle at reach.
And so this leads to a lot more
drama-wise and tension-wise.
I mean, the sequence in the book is Bowman never goes out, and then Hal opens the two airlocks, which I thought was dramatic. In this one, in the movie,
it was dramatic, but it's not dramatic as a car chasing after your colleague who's going to be lost in space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not more dramatic than potentially being marooned or abandoned in space by the evil AI who is not letting you back on board the ship.
Exactly.
That's true.
That is not more, and
because he goes,
how are you going to do it when you don't have your helmet, your gloves, when you're not even in a spacesuit? How are you going to get in that door? That is the drama of the movie. Is that scene right there? Is the guts to go back in?
Yeah.
You have to abandon your colleague to its fate, and you fight your way in that door. That's drama, and that's better. That's a better scene.
Because he immediately puts the astronaut into like an unsafe position, as opposed to just turning on the airlocks where he's already in a safe position, and then he just has to like duck into this closet.
Mm-hmm. Which isn't bad. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But the other one was better, at least, and especially from a movie standpoint.
Yeah,
absolutely. Not only that, but
but Kubrick still doesn't show what actually happens to Poole.
No, he does though, because he sends the pod right after.
But they don't
Poole.
show.
Oh, how he floated away.
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
No, but they don't need to.
But that's
right. No, that's fine.
You know what happens.
Which, by the way, which is consistent with the rest of the film, because this is a film that deliberately leaves
a lot out.
Everything out. If you as the viewer are not willing to do some mental work at all, if you're not willing to plug those holes, this is not the movie for you. You are going to you're going to need to be imaginative.
Yeah.
No. So you see the pod coming at him with its claws out, whatever, and then he goes flying, and then Bowman goes out there and saves him, and Hal refuses to let him in, and then you're like, oh my God, now what? Like, Rich, that's a good point. He's like marooned, and it's like, and no one can help him. He's out there. So I guess then we find out there's like there's a manual way to get into the ship, but he can't do that because he doesn't have his helmet for his spacesuit.
Right.
But he decides to risk it anyways because, well, I guess what else is he going to do?
Right.
So he sort of like bursts out of the pod.
He blows the explosive bolts on the escape hatch to go directly into the airlock, which he had already opened. So he was in decompressed space, so to speak, and such, but he shut the emergency before. You're not going to instantaneously die. You got a good 30 seconds or so, according to every sci-fi movie I've ever seen.
So what they did with the stunt guy, which I was getting at, is the way they filmed this is they made like a vertical corridor, and they hung the stunt guy on like a rope, and they put him in a spacesuit. But apparently the spacesuit was sealed completely and didn't have air holes. They'd pump oxygen in there, but the guy was breathing into the suit, the stunt guy. So he was creating carbon dioxide in his own suit, so he would eventually suffocate. So they had to like stop and take it off him. apparently, this is what I read on Wikipedia. Like, I don't know if this is all true, but the stunt guy has said they were doing a take and it was taking too long. Crew was like, we need to get him out of the suit so he can breathe. And Kubrick was like, we just got him up there. Do another one, or something to that effect. And the stunt guy ended up passing out, and then they had to like let him down and take him out. And apparently Kubrick then left the set, and then the stunt guy said like when he got together again, he went looking for Kubrick and was going to like really give it to him. And Kubrick didn't come back to the set for like a couple days.
Which scene was this?
The airlock scene.
But he didn't have a helmet.
He does have a helmet eventually.
Yeah, but that's not the airlock scene. He doesn't get a helmet again until he goes back in the ship.
But he bursts out of the ship.
Bursts out of the pod, he's got no helmet.
But doesn't he drop down?
Yes, he does.
Because that's what they said. He was on a rope and he had to drop down to hit that button. Mm-hmm. And he was on a wire and there was like a crew guy holding the other end of the wire, dropping him down.
That all makes sense.
And he had to go back up and they had to like do it. And yeah, I know what you're saying. Like he didn't have a helmet, but I don't know. Or maybe that was just dangerous because he was like being suspended and dropped right to a camera and then being yanked back up. And then maybe there's another thing where he was suffocating. I don't know. I have to go back and look at it. But I know what you're saying. Like, yeah, he didn't have a helmet in that scene. But he does get a helmet like right after that. Do we see him put the helmet on? We don't, right?
No, he's got the infamous green helmet on.
Right.
Yeah, so it must have been like right after that or something. As they're nearing, I think, the end of the filming of this, Kubrick, I think he was not sure how to end this because he wasn't so convinced about the Star Child ending. He actually, and there's a great article about this written by the author Michael Moorcock, which I shared with you guys. He, behind Arthur C. Clarke's back, reached out to other science fiction writers, supposedly Michael Moorcock and J.G. Ballard at least, and wanted help from them to complete the film, without letting Clarke know that he was doing this. But Moorcock was friends with Clarke, and I don't know if J.G. Ballard was, but they decided not to engage Kubrick and help him because they thought it would be disloyal to Clarke. So he ends up not hiring anyone else and just ends up finishing it. But Moorcock had this film is going on, the production's going on for a while, and, he's hearing all about this film, and at one point, Moorcock visited the set, and a publicist, I think, is taking him around, and they run into Stanley Kubrick, and this is the quote that Moorcock said about his visit on set, which I just found funny. He said, I have one other memory of that visit to the 2001 set. After being given a tour of the studio by the MGM publicist, I was led towards Kubrick's office just as the director entered the main building. I prepared to meet the man who had contacted me a year or so earlier. I had many questions. Perhaps he would confirm some of my guesses. Kubrick's eyes went straight to me and did not leave me as he spoke brusquely to the publicist. Get these people off the set, he said. We were never face to face again. I just like that.
Yeah,
if you read the article, Moorcock is pretty fair to Kubrick as far as the film, and he feels that some of the changes that Kubrick made to the film were good. But he does kind of stick it to Kubrick at the end there of the article. It's a good article.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mentioned this to you in passing when you shared that article. I think that's pretty typical of a director to take that position when it comes to a writer, because I'm sure I know that it's not the first disagreement that Kubrick had with writers he was working with. He and Stephen King have an infamous falling out when making The Shining.
And I think there was a falling out with Burgess after Clockwork Orange came out, and there was all this controversy going on. Burgess felt like Kubrick just backed off and let Burgess handle all of it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, I don't know.
And he changed the ending.
Yeah, I don't think, not to say that Kubrick was an angel, but I think that at a certain point, when you're making a film, it's such a different entity from a book, because as a writer of a book, it's your creation alone. You have your publicist to answers to, but it kind of stops there, and your readers, and it kind of ends there. Whereas as a director, it's a constant battle to even make sure that the vision even reaches fruition, because you're fighting personalities of actors, of investors, of producers, of movie studios, of city that you're filming it in. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And then you've got this other entity of the writer that's helping you with the story. And when you bring in that into the equation, now you have not only another person to tell you how the movie should be made, but now this other person telling you how they think it should be made happens to be a significant, person of what the vision of it should be, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like too many chefs in the kitchen, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that it makes sense that he would have an attitude towards any writer, even if he has a good relationship with them, because in order for a film to be a book to be adapted to film, the person who wrote the book, and in this case it was written at the same time, so it's even a more complicated situation, but that person who wrote that book has to kind of give that director some freedom to make some decisions on their own.
Well, it'll depend on their contract.
Yeah. I mean, they have to have some vision.
That's the way it works.
Because if they don't, you have, I mean, unless the writer themselves is experienced as a director in film, they're not going to get everything that needs to be done to get that vision to come across the right way.
Watch Hellraiser by Clive Barker.
Yeah.
He wrote that book and directed the movie. It was his first movie. He literally we talked about this on the podcast that we did on it. He literally pitched himself to be the director, thinking the studio wouldn't hire him. And he so convinced them that they hired him. He was like, oh, because he thought, I will pitch myself. And when they say no to me, I'll tell them who I really want. And then maybe they'll go with who I want. Something like that. And they end up saying, oh, okay, you can direct it. He literally went to the library to look for a book about how to make movies. And then there wasn't any. They were all checked out or they were gone or something like that. But he made that movie and was a huge success.
Right.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, that's the way it goes. But let's get on to the premiere. Overall, the film was less explanatory than the book. And I saw, and I don't know if it was misattributed, but because I think Michael Moorcock said this also in his article, but James Randi, the former stage musician turned skeptic, who worked in at least one of Clarke's TV shows to debunk metal bending, reported that Clarke walked out of the intermission at the premiere of the show, which I think shown to just the corporate executives. Supposedly he walked out of this 11-minute long sequence of the astronauts doing nothing but jogging around space. This didn't make it to the final film. I think 19 minutes was cut out from that initial premiere. And I guess Kubrick was known for kind of often editing his work until the bitter end. But there was a bunch of scenes so I guess they just had to get this thing together, and he just put it out, and there was this scene where it was a doubled up scene. He had the astronauts jogging, which is in the film, but then I guess he had another sequence of the astronauts jogging again. There was also notably narration. I think Clarke was doing the narration, right?
I have a feeling that's really what irked Clarke, because I think what I recall reading and hearing in interviews was that...
Well, that was supposed to explain a lot of what was going on, right?
Yeah, I think Kubrick painstakingly filmed, or I guess captured the audio from Clarke of doing narration, of basically narrating almost every scene, and talking about hours upon hours of takes of narration, and basically Kubrick just threw it all in the trash. There's not a single narration from I don't think there's a single narration, is there?
No.
And I really think
there's barely any dialogue.
Yeah, I really think that's probably what upset Clarke, even though I think...
Frustrated, at least, if you did all the narration and then they're like, oh, we're not using it. What he also did is Kubrick had previously worked with the composer on a couple films and hired him to do original score for this film, and then decided, because they were using a temporary music when they were editing it.
That's pretty typical.
And he decided, we're going to just go with this temporary stuff. And they didn't do any original score. But that ended up making the movie kind of what it is.
Are you sure about that?
I thought the opening song, the opening Dawn of Man, I thought that was original, because I thought that's literally called 2001.
The one piece, the...
Yeah, no, that one's original, I believe.
Yeah, that's he specifically picked that piece by, what's his name? That's such a famous piece of music.
What do you mean that if he picked it, then how could it be original?
No, it was original. He picked it out of all the rest of the stuff that he did.
It wasn't just placeholder. It sounded to me like you're saying he just had some placeholder music in there to get the movie going, and then he just decided to go with it. But that's not the case.
Which Blue Danube, for the space flight scene is, obviously existing.
And also Sprach Zarathustra, which I think is that the one you're talking about? That's by Richard Strauss.
Is it?
I'm gonna look it up right now.
All right.
Because I'm thinking about the main theme.
Nothing says good podcasting like everyone diving for an iPhone. Quickly, to the internet.
Well, you can edit this all out. But here, so...
Also Sprach...
No, we need tension. There's Ryan typing on his turquoise iPhone 4. Wait, he's got to reboot. Now he's taking a picture of his ottoman.
No, there's an ad playing.
Ligeti, Atmospheres. Ligeti. That's the piece I'm thinking of.
When was it composed, or was it for this?
Are you thinking of
this?
It
was for this.
Okay.
This isn't it.
Nuts.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is also Sprach Zarathustra by Strauss.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're wrong.
I'm wrong.
Famous thing. But not made for the film.
My mistake?
I was listening to Dole.
Learn something new every day.
Wikipedia is not always wrong.
There you go. Well, interestingly enough,
because
that's such an appropriate piece of music because...
Yeah, it's about, it's got a whole story about it. I was trying to read about it. It's about Nietzsche, and it's about the Ubermensch and Superman and all this stuff. I don't know. Look it up.
I don't know what that piece of music is about.
Do you want me to do that now?
I was just going to say that, in terms of the story, the ratios of the monolith, 1-4-9, right?
Yeah, which aren't correct in the movie.
Well, yeah.
The ratios are different in
right.
fiction.
Well, they don't really get into that, right?
No, but they aren't the same as in the book. Kubrick changed the ratios.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't even really tell, I guess.
Well,
I guess the ratios that Arthur C. Clarke would have created were like a shorter, fatter monolith, and Kubrick wanted a more imposing, taller one.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, interestingly enough, I think that piece of music is sort of his way of representing that, because that sequence, that it's not a triad, but going up the octave, I think it kind of represents that, the ratio of the monolith. Okay. That's how I interpreted it. I never really thought about it before, but I always thought that piece of music is so important to the film, because sound in general throughout the film is so integral because there's so little of it. So when he does introduce any sort of sound, it's like, here I'm...
Yeah, I had another podcast I was listening to talk about how a lot of the other points in the movie, all you're hearing is like breathing or like airflow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's not much dialogue.
Right.
So
right.
The music does really hit home. And in a powerful song like that one, I mean, it's just like bombastic.
Yeah.
But he didn't even tell the composer that he hired to make original music, who did make original music for the entire film, I guess. He didn't even tell the guy, oh, we didn't use your music. The guy found out at the premiere when he went and watched it and listened, and it wasn't his music. That's Kubrick, I guess.
Yeah.
He ended up cutting out 17 minutes of stuff. And apparently Kubrick had all these outtakes from Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Barry Lyndon, and 2001 stored in the garage because he worked out of his house. He had this big estate, I think, that his widow still lives in England. And I guess right before his death, he made sure his assistant went and took all these outtakes and just like burned them in a fire outside somewhere. But I saw that in 2010, Warner Brothers found about 17 minutes more footage from 2001 in one of their archives from that initial premiere. I don't know if they've ever done anything with it. That was Alex North that he hired to do the original music they did not use, who worked on Spartacus and Doctor Strangelove previously. So Kubrick, he wanted to go for a less explanatory thing. He wanted this thing to be more like music or like a painting. And I guess he did an article, or he did an interview article with Playboy in 1968. And he kind of compared 2001 to Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, because he didn't want to explain the film. And he's like, look, if I explain it, it'd be like the same thing as if someone put a caption on the Mona Lisa saying why she's smiling. And he's like, it would just kind of ruin the viewer's interpretation. He didn't want to skew people one way or another.
I think he went even further than that. He said it'd be like if somebody wrote on the back of the Mona Lisa, the reason she's smiling is because her lover is taking a picture of her.
Yeah, he had like two reasons.
It's like explaining exactly what's happening.
That's why he didn't want to explain the movie to anyone.
Because it ruins the effect. It makes it not pointless. It's no longer...
Though he acknowledged that, Clarke's book was more explanatory, and he didn't say that was bad. He just thought it was interesting.
Right.
Like just like another take of the same thing. It actually, this won Kubrick his only personal Oscar, which was for special effects, which kind of caused a bit of a stir because I think it was like, why should Kubrick just get that by himself when there was a whole special effects team? And I guess they changed the rules for how that award worked after that.
I'm sure, that being said, I'm sure he was actively involved in those effects.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But
no doubt in my mind.
And then, of course, after this, he wanted to make a film that had a much more modest budget, which was Clockwork Orange, which we covered. And that was in 1971. But the film is, it's really its own thing. When you start off with the early man stuff, I guess you do get the sense of the rival tribes, although I felt it was a little bit less clear. They changed the monolith to a black one because I think it was easier to film. There's a famous sequence when Moon Watcher gets his bone weapon and he throws it up in the air, and then that turns into the spaceship that transitions to the moon. That's like a famous kind of like...
it's very iconic piece of film,
But, I mean, I thought the depiction, like we just said, the costumes were great of the apes. I don't know how they did that leopard effect. If that was like...
I don't know, man.
Real leopard or something or what? I don't know.
Probably a trained animal they had.
Yeah.
I'm sure they had animal handlers or something.
How do you think they achieved the night shine?
The eyes? I saw something about that today. That was a happy accident, is what Kubrick said. Is because of the way that they were filming it with the mirrors and the lighting and all that, that was unintentional.
That's so cool.
And it just like came out that way, and it looked cool. So they were lucky.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know like there's a lot of scenes in this film that are just like very iconic, very much like The Shining, that they're just, Kubrick had this amazing way of using symmetry and using color, and you just see like every scene is a piece of art, it's really amazing. I mean, that alone doesn't carry a film, but by God, it's that coupled with a great plot and great acting, and you've got I think he had it all. He had
the attention to detail. Like, I mean, they said that like even like the depiction of Hale as like this lens, this red lens, but then it was in a black box, almost like hinting at the monolith, the black monolith.
Oh, I didn't even think of that, but that's
interesting. I saw some people pointing that out, or heard people talking about that like Hal's eye was always in a black rectangle.
Yeah, because I think in the book, like, there's no personification of Hal. He's just a voice.
Yeah.
Right? I think Clarke even says that. He never mentions a physical camera or anything that looks...
They mention cameras being around.
Yeah, but they don't say that that's Hal.
Right.
Where this is like a personification of Hal.
Yeah.
And I think that was clever of Kubrick to do that, because it kind of made him seem like a real character then. It wasn't just a voice, just kind of breaking the fourth wall. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was a actual being, So
some of the things just worked out. Like, I mean, the book had them going to Saturn's moon, but I guess Kubrick didn't like the special effects version of Saturn's rings. He didn't think they looked realistic enough, so they changed it to Jupiter.
Oh, did they? I thought that. See, that was the point. I thought that he had gotten to that point in production that he didn't know that Clarke had arrived at Saturn.
No, it was. He didn't like what they came up with for rings, because Trumbull, the guy that he hired from that documentary, went on to do the film Silent Running with Bruce Dern, which is an interesting film, and he finally figured out how to do Saturn's rings in a better way in that film, which that guy directed. But I guess Kubrick didn't like the Saturn ring, so he's like, we can't do it. It's going to not look as authentic.
Right.
And that's why they did it to Jupiter. But I guess...
And let's be honest, that's probably the least important detail to focus on.
Yeah.
But Clarke ended up changing some of the sequels to match it up with the film, the sequel books, and I guess...
Which actually makes me not like Clarke as much.
Yes, but I guess what we learned about Saturn and Jupiter since then, and I don't know what exactly, made that happy accident, like, fortuitous. And I think... what we later discovered about Saturn, like, they should have set the monolith on Jupiter's moon as opposed to Saturn's. Mm-hmm. So, whatever. But yeah, I kind of don't like that Clarke changes the internal inconsistencies of his series to match the film, but whatever. So it was that. And then we talked about the differences with the Hale sequence. I mean, the effects of gravity were amazing. We kind of talked about that. I think the biggest then change is the Stargate stuff.
Well... What do you mean by the Stargate? You mean just the point when he enters the Stargate from that point on?
Yeah, I mean, like, the other parts of the movie, I think there might be some more subtle differences in the book, but overall...
Yeah, overall they're about the same, other than the way the tension's brought during the whole Hell stuff, but everything else is pretty much the same, I think.
See, in all fairness, until I read the book, I had no idea that was a Stargate.
I didn't either.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, in my view at this point, and I still kind of hold this, is that, you know what, the visuals that they were seeing did not in any way appear to be stars. It's the old joke in Spaceballs. They went plaid. In my mind, actually, that's almost some of the visualizations that were supposed to be appearing on the clear monolith at the birth of man. I almost view it as
in the book,
as the reprogramming of Dave at that point. It doesn't matter if he travels somewhere else. They don't show us any of that. It's just, this is the literal reprogramming, or whatever you want to call that, of Dave at that point. I mean, the monolith is not on the planet. You don't have that going down there, because I believe he wanted that symmetry of the 3 moon shot that he always loves having, or the 3 celestial bodies, and he's got that in between. But then, like, it fades up. It's not even going into the monolith. It pans up and then it goes to the Stargate. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter. Let him. This is that evolution scene, whatever that could be.
I ask you, before we do that, what did the monolith do in the film to the early man? Because it doesn't project images like in the book.
Not a thing.
It didn't really do anything. They touched it, is what happened.
Yeah.
Did it give the beep? Did it give the one beep and the monkeys jump around, or not even that?
Man,
I don't remember.
I'm struggling to remember, but I don't think it did the sound thing that it did.
I remember this podcast that I was listening to talk about how when the monkeys do, or the apes do, like, make weapons,
the ape men are part of the great ape family. They're not a monkey.
Right. So they flash back to the monolith to let the viewer know that the monolith is influencing the apes. Because otherwise, like someone was saying, like, how would it be clear that the monolith was doing anything if you're just only watching the film?
Right.
But anyway, so the Stargate scene, though, as far as I was concerned, it's not clear it was a Stargate. Mm-hmm. And that's why
we don't go to the Grand.
You don't go to the Grand Junction. You don't do any of that. You go to the hotel room.
And you know what? I got to say this, like, just putting it out there. We talked about this in the last episode. Until you brought in your interpretation of Clarke's ending, I was really kind of hating Clarke's ending, and this is why. This is why, because
that's just one page.
Yes, and if it weren't for your interpretation, I probably still would hate Clarke's ending. But I don't hate it now, but I don't like it as much as Kubrick's ending. And this is, I'm going to tell you right now, this is why, is because he spells everything out. And, I feel like in reality, if you were in the position that David Bowman was in, you have no idea what the hell's going on. How do you know this thing's just a Stargate? You have no clue what you're doing right now. You're floating into this monolith that's out in space, and all of a sudden you're shot through a star and all kinds of crazy visuals.
Doesn't the monolith in the film come out to space to greet him?
No. Wait, it's floating.
It's floating in space. It's
not just floating there
on the planet at first. It's out in space.
It's just in orbit,
Yeah.
I love how he managed to find a black rectangle floating in space. So I hope he was using radar. But I mean, like, it was just out there. But again, I think
he doesn't get sucked into it. Like
I think that was an artistic view. It was, he got to that point. They wanted that shot with the 3 celestial bodies, and such, or 2 in the monolith, the one that they've carried throughout the whole film. But it's less important less important almost like what it is as opposed to what it does, how you get to the end.
Right.
But I'm guessing there was probably something where it was too hard to build another one of these things on a planet and make it a tunnel, or
it could just be budget, huh?
Or, this could just be a practical decision, that this is easier, there's this art, and,
It flows in. I mean, by having that weird like that, it flows into the Stargate effect that he came up with by just staying abstract.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they sure did that.
Yeah. Which, was fortuitous, or not fortuitous, but was fortuitous. It was lucky to them because the corporate executives who, like, when they saw the initial premiere of this, did not love it. And you got supposedly Arthur C. Clarke walking out in tears because they cut his narration or whatever. And you got the composer being like, "Where's my music?" But this was not an immediate, like, "Oh, we got a hit on our hands." Right. And then I think when it hit, it did like a roadshow release, which I was looking at earlier tonight. That is would be considered like a limited release, with some differences slightly for what we have now. And then it went to a wide release. The early critics didn't like this film and were kind of crapping on it. But what saved this film was the
DVD sales.
No, the post-hippie psychedelic scene.
Yeah, they said that was a huge boost.
I mean, not that everyone was going there and tripping on drugs, but the young people got a hold of this movie and it was like nothing they'd seen before.
Right.
And saw these kind of like psychedelic ending, was like, you got to see this film. And that is what made it a hit.
So let me tell you about the time that I saw this movie. How did you guys see this movie? Did you watch it at home or did you see it on the big screen?
Saw it at home.
I saw it on that big screen right there.
Ryan is pointing to his cathode ray tube television. He watched one of the
They still exist.
One of the greatest cinematic experiences, and he watched it on a CRT.
I've actually had to pound that TV to get the color to look a little bit closer to what it should be.
Ryan's been holding the magnets next to it to get the VHF stations in just right.
But I did have to bring like a magnet thing to it once to fit.
So I saw this on the big screen in 1999. And it was part of the American Film. It could have been 98, but anyway, it was part of the American Film Institute's 100 Best Films.
Was that the restored version? Wasn't because Christopher Nolan, I guess, worked on a version of this for.
That's more recent.
That's recent. Okay,
that was more recent. But my version, they were showing it up in Madison, so I saw it at the UW at the Student Union, and my version was introduced by James Earl Jones. We had James Earl Jones there.
That's amazing.
In person presenting this thing.
Who was in Dr. Strangelove.
Who was in Dr. Strangelove, another Kubrick film, but not this film. When he was introducing it, he said, when this film came out, nobody understood what was going on. And he said, and then there's the ending. The rumor got out that to get the ending, first off, people said, to get the ending, you've got to be high. And then the rumor got out that to understand the ending, you got to get high. and everybody started showing up crazy. And when James Earl Jones tells you that people are showing up to this thing out of their gourd, you kind of believe it. Gives it the gravitas and such. And I take that literally. I think that was the era people would do it, and you'd go.
Makes sense.
And such. So
I think Steven Spielberg said when this was like the big bang of science fiction when it came out, or theaters. Like,
it influenced so many films after that. I mean, even down to like that shot of the Discovery spacecraft, just, field of view perspective wise, floating from one corner of the screen to the other. I mean,
Star Wars.
Star Wars ripped that off, man.
Yeah.
And everybody credits George Lucas for being this genius for coming up with that sequence, and he stole it. He literally stole that.
But it influenced everyone. I mean,
in all fairness, it was a running battle going over and doing that overhead too. But anyway,
sure. But I'm just saying that.
Well, he built on that.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't call it quite a ripoff. But I mean, even like, is it Cameron who worked, or is it Ridley Scott who worked on Alien?
Yes.
Yeah.
Alien was inspired by this, and the first Star Trek motion picture movie, I think,
definitely
took it. I mean, the beginning of this movie starts off, and I guess the Star Trek movies started off like this too, with just music playing for like, I don't know how long.
It started off with a traditional overture.
Yeah, with just a black screen and just...
Star Trek did that?
The first Star Trek movie, I think,
I don't
might have done that
remember
with stars, I think. And it's just an overture with stars.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, the very first movie, which I think is not that popular, was directed by Robert Wise, who did The Haunting, which we talked about on a previous podcast. But yeah, this is a very influential film.
Yeah.
And people were tripping their balls off going to see it. Well, at least they were talking about that you need to do that to go see it.
I know for a fact when I was in my younger days, we used to listen to Pink Floyd Echoes for the last sequence of Jupiter and the Infinite, because it locked up perfectly with it.
With this?
Yeah.
Oh, along with,
pretty much the whole Stargate scene.
Wow.
From that point on, completely, utterly links up to that track. It's like a 20-minute track, I think.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Totally.
Oh, and that documentary, I watched that one of those two documentaries that he pulled crew from, and there is like a sequence where they're showing like traveling through space, and you see these like, sort of clouds and the stars going by you, and it's just like the space sequence, but it's in black and white, and it's a lot shorter.
For which is this?
One of the two documentaries that I mentioned.
Okay.
That Kubrick saw and poached people from to work on 2001.
Interesting. I was wondering about that, like how he was able to do all those graphics. I mean, some of the stuff is just like photo negative kind of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that's like pretty, for when it was created, like the whole psychedelic scene stuff that they were.
Oh yeah, I was watching and I was like, wow.
I don't know how he was able to do it.
It's impressive now to watch it.
Yeah,
it doesn't look cheesy. It doesn't look dated.
It looks very authentic.
But so he does include the hotel, whatever.
Yes.
Waiting room or whatever.
Right.
I don't think does the character get in? He doesn't get into like having the cereal, the blue. There's no blue cereal or.
Well, the character does eat, but I thought that a nice thing that he did. I'm sure this was all Kubrick, and this could just it was very reminiscent of The Shining to me, was how he has Bowman first in the pod looking outside, and then all of a sudden, he when he's looking outside of the pod, he sees himself outside of the pod in his spacesuit, and he's already looking older, and then from that point, he's in the spacesuit outside of the pod looking at the dining room area where he sees a very much older version of David Bowman dressed in like a nightgown, night
shirt or something,
a night robe, eating the meal, and he's like got gray hair and wrinkles, and then
shows him on the bed.
Then he shows him dropping the glass of wine, and then he looks up and he sees himself much older on his deathbed, laying in bed, and then that's when the whole sequence of, I guess, transformation to the Star Child takes place. But
see, in some ways that bothers me, actually, because at least in the novel, Bowman is taking an action. He is deciding to leave the pod. He is deciding to take off the helmet. He is deciding to eat, do all that stuff.
Does he get older in the novel? He doesn't, right?
But see, I don't recall. But where I was going is that it kind of goes along, which is why I thought it was basically him being reprogrammed, is basically, he's being taken along this path, which is completing the life cycle, which is giving having this experience that then leads to, as a parent, rebirth and such. But it's just like it's like, he can't stop it. The river is going that way and it's sweeping him along. I felt there was a difference in how that moved.
There's no doubt there's a big difference there. But you know what? The reason there's a couple things I like about the fact that Kubrick took that artistic license. The first thing,
I think the concept
I'm sorry. Yeah, feel free to take it. That was a master.
Right. I think the first thing is that
Clarke came up with the idea of this hotel room waiting area, which was originally going to be like with robot servants or something like.
Oh, really?
Catering to them.
I didn't know that, but But I mean, first of all, the scene itself of seeing like a person watch themselves rapidly grow old is pretty iconic. It's memorable, but it also kind of gives a little bit more interpretation to how it pushes him into becoming this star child and this embryo, so to speak, in that final scene. Like it's almost death and rebirth. Mm-hmm. That's how I kind of interpret it.
Oh yes.
And then also like
his human existence ends before he can metamorphosize or whatever else he is, and that's the legitimate question. What is happening?
Right. And I don't know if you guys got this too, but some of his visual stuff that he shows at one point that you kind of see, it looks like it's the pod in a cocoon. It's like surrounded by bubbling and it's shooting through like some cosmic like nebula or something at one point. I don't know if you saw that. There's
after the hotel?
I think it's during or before. I can't remember it, but there's one point where there's like a lava stuff and looks like a nebula. It's like, I don't know, but there's a scene like that, and I literally interpreted it as like, is this like really supposed to be like conception? Is that what we're seeing? Or was he trying to allude to that? Like he takes a lot of license there. I think that he was trying to give some sort of ambiguity between, is this happening in space? Is this happening in David Bowman's mind? Is this an actual death and rebirth thing? We don't know. And it's better that we don't know, and it's better for each audience member to kind of pick out their own way of interpreting what it is. I think that's why it's so effective. Whereas, like, Clarke's ending is like, he spells everything out, really. I mean, he says this is what's happening. He's becoming the Star Child, and...
Well, but I mean, it's not so explained, though. It's way more explained in the movie, but it's not like, I mean, what is this Star Child?
Right.
And then when he goes to the Earth and he's like, what am I going to do next? And he's like, well, I'll figure it out.
Right.
That's not so explained, although I guess he's got more books to come afterwards.
Sure. But I mean, even like in Kubrick's film, like, I mean, I remember when the first time I saw it.
Go ahead.
Well, the first time I saw it, I never thought that Bowman was that infant at the end. I really had no idea how to...
Oh, really?
The very first time I saw it, and I mean, it was a very long time ago, but I didn't know how to interpret it. It was just like, what the heck is going on,
Did you think it was him when he was old?
Not until maybe many times. I mean, I've seen this film so many times in my life now, but maybe 3 or 4 times after that, I started to recognize that, this embryo, the face looked an awful lot like the actor who plays Bowman. And I thought that, okay, now I get it. Okay, he's become like this child that lives in space, I guess, or whatever, But they don't really ever show him like in perspective with Earth. They kind of show him, and then they show Earth, right? I don't remember them ever showing him right next to a small planet. Do they do that? I don't think they do.
The end?
Yeah.
I don't think they do. I don't think he has the Star Child go back to Earth.
Well, I think he implies it, but it's not like blatant. Like in the book, he actually lays it out. He says, "Okay, he's transported back, and here he is, and he's dwarfing their Earth, basically." I think in Kubrick's film, they don't really show that. The last scene is really just showing the Star Child, and that's it. They don't really show the Star Child in perspective with the Earth. Do they?
Until they kind of show the bit of its head. They show them together. I mean, you can get the shot where you've got like the weird head and a bit of the Earth. They don't, the full shot is of the Star Child looking at the Earth.
Right. But you don't really. I mean, you got to interpret that. They don't really.
I always interpreted it. I just went wackadoo, and I was just sitting there going, "All right, he's saying that each person is its own world, and
it does. It's not like
perception your perception is your world, and it's your own." Because I didn't know what to make of that thing until I read that novel.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that before I read the book, even, I don't think I really truly got that the Star Child in the film was this huge child looking at Earth, and Earth is this tiny thing to it. I didn't get that.
No.
And in fact, I didn't really like it. Like I was telling Ryan when you stepped away for a minute that I didn't even.
I took my own intermission, folks.
I didn't really until maybe the third or fourth time I saw the film really understand that the Star Child was David Bowman, because I didn't notice until like maybe the third or fourth time I've seen the film that, the facial features, it looks like the actor that plays David in the film. You can kind of see that.
Yeah.
But the first couple times I saw the film, I didn't realize it. And I was like, what the heck is going on? Didn't mean I didn't like it. I was just like, what's going on? I'm lost.
I just made my peace with it. That was as far as I went on that. But
yeah.
I mean, I don't think they had the Star Child like floating over Earth like how you get a sense of from the book. And he doesn't have the nuclear, he doesn't call back to the nuclear weapons.
Right. And
he leaves it way more open.
And I kind of feel like, you know what, man? This is, again, I think attributed to Kubrick's genius, is just like what he cut out the fat to me there. I felt like that wasn't even necessary. It was already like the whole scene was so dramatic enough, and he didn't want to spell out what's happening. Like, let's just show this crazy stuff that occurs after this guy approaches this monolith, and he's not even there's no way for him, or anyone really for that matter, to comprehend what's happening. It's too far above our perception as humans to understand what's happening to this person.
So when when Ryan first mentioned this and started thinking about the 2001 movie, I'm like, would it do me any good to watch the sequel, the 2010? And I did not. I've seen it. I've flipped by it on a TBS afternoon or whatever, but I've never really touched it. But I ended up putting it in IMDb.
Different director.
Oh, different, just about different everything. But I'll
same
tell you,
actors though, right?
It does have your buddy
David Bowman.
David Bowman. But I'll tell you what, I ended up pumping it into IMDb, and it brought up a Roger Ebert review of 2010.
Yeah, he's positive.
And this is one of my favorite lines, and it's one of the things I think that best sums up one thing in terms of another. And it's also a good way of comparing almost like the book to the movie. See if you agree with me. It goes, this is again Roger Ebert, in a more temporal sphere, 2010 qualifies as superior entertainment. A movie more at home with technique than poetry, with character than mystery. A movie that explains too much and leaves too little to our sense of wonderment, but a good movie all the same. I actually feel the same way about the book compared to the movie in many ways. And they're both good and such, but the movie is more art. The movie is more, poetry may not be the right word when you're dealing with a visual mastery, but the first 25 minutes of the movie, nobody talks.
Right.
I mean, in the last 23 minutes of the movie, nobody talks. This is an exceptionally visually reliant movie.
Yeah. And
it leaves so much for you to do. It is an exercise. Anyway, I always just thought that was, I just happened across that one. And once I saw that, that's when I stopped reading any of the other backup stuff, because you know what? I was content with the mystery and the poetry and such, and I don't want any more information on it.
That's interesting you say that, Rich, because when we saw Metropolis, and we were talking about the book.
Yep.
You compared the book of Metropolis to being like a libretto or something to a opera.
Well,
you read this book in conjunction with watching this movie, so you have a better understanding, which I thought was a kind of a cool comparison. And then I wondered with this film, and I think I saw people, there was comments and stuff and things that I read where people said, you went and you read this book to find out what you just watched. And you guys said that tonight.
True.
You go to this book looking for answers, and Clarke provides a lot of answers.
But yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. And in the case of Metropolis, again, Metropolis being a silent movie and a film made in Germany, there's a lot of implied dialogue. They don't put up cards for everything that everybody's saying all the time. Sometimes people are just talking, and then all of a sudden there's like a card that pops up and it's like, thanks. And you're like, oh, okay. And things like that. So you're right, Ryan. I was referring almost as like the plot summary of what goes on in an opera. If people are singing in Italian, I don't know what's going on. I can kind of guess. So yeah, in some ways, that's why I kind of looked at the novel tie-in as rather interesting. But I found that I like the mystery. I don't want to know about midichlorians. You know what?
Exactly.
I'm in my old age. I'm content with the wonderment. There's not enough magic in the world.
I could not agree more.
Those are just different approaches to the same thing. I mean, some people can write books with well-developed magic systems, and some people write books that are more wonderment, like Lord of the Rings or this. But let me ask you both: If you were talking to someone who had never seen this movie or read the book, I think you both would say, go see the movie, right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
Would you tell that person to also read the book?
No.
No.
You wouldn't say, oh, now read the book, or read the book first, or read the book afterwards, or you wouldn't even bring up the book?
Well, in our previous podcast, I say, oh, everyone should read the book. Yes, but I prefaced that. I should have prefaced it before, but I would preface it by saying, if you haven't seen the film, do not read the book. Like, you should see the film. And if you like the film and you want more answers, then you should go read the book. Because really, I mean, it is supplemental. I mean, I hate to say it, and Clarke would probably hate to hear this from anybody who read this, but it really is kind of a novelization of the film. The film is the superior piece of art in my book. I mean,
in your film.
Yeah, in my film. Yeah, and from my perspective, sorry. But yeah, I mean, it's just a superior piece of art, you know.
Rich, would you tell someone to read the book, or would you say, don't bother?
If it was somebody who needs to know, man, then yeah, I'd tell them to read. But I mean, like, if Cheryl...
What if they didn't know it was based on a book? Would you be like, oh, it is based on a book, you should check out the book?
I was the one who was least impressed by the book. So I would probably not necessarily say go seek out the book unless somebody desperately needed to know what was going on. There are some great, again, it's a great clarity. And again, they are different art forms. Please do not take my not quite as impressed nature with the book as saying that it's bad in any way. It does what it is, and it's inspirational to, as I said, to maybe it's just the right kind of writing to inspire, to be the diving board for Kubrick. I mean, it's a springboard to greater things. But I you know what, for the casual person, I don't think unless they absolutely had to have answers, I don't think they need it.
But yet, it did inspire you to want to pursue more of Clarke's writing.
Yeah, but I haven't yet.
You haven't yet, but you'd like to.
You know what? I am remiss in not knowing. I've never read Asimov.
But now you've read this, so you could say, I've read Clarke, I'm done.
Well, I'll tell you what, I know.
But you said tonight, or you said the last episode, I've read Clarke, and I'd like to read another one.
Yes, especially.
And you did not say that about the book for Metropolis.
No. The nice part about Clarke is I know he can write. I mean, I know he can write clearly, concisely. I frankly have been just deciding what the devil it would be that I would want to read. I just haven't figured out what that would be.
Childhood's End, I think, is the way.
Apparently, it's Childhood End. So anyway,
I think that's the way to go, man.
All right, well, there we go. Yeah. No, other than that, I'm all on board with the movie.
Cool. I don't know. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about with the film that we haven't already talked about?
Well, I thought there was an interesting. I remember years back hearing a story talking about George Miller, the guy who made Mad Max, Road Warrior, even the new Mad Max,
right,
and such. That he and his colleague, I think it was Kennedy, anyway, that they had this theory on filmmaking that it should have as little dialogue as possible.
Huh.
And if you watch the Road Warrior, like Mel Gibson has 16 lines of dialogue in it. And I mean, like, that's it. And you know what? That one does a very good job of conveying the story and such. And this one really did an amazing visual job of conveying most of that together. And I mean, it conveyed...
Show, don't tell.
Yeah. And you know what? Because we were talking about the elimination of the narration. And the only movie that I can think of where I would really compare that is Blade Runner.
Oh, yeah, Blade Runner, which had narration and didn't have a narration, depending on which version you watch, right?
That's correct. Now, did both of you see Blade Runner?
We covered on this podcast, first episode.
I am ashamed to admit I have never seen Blade Runner.
Okay. Never?
I've seen bits and pieces, but never from start to finish.
But you've seen the new one, probably.
I haven't.
Did you see the theatrical release or the director's cut?
He hasn't seen it.
I've seen bits. I'll say it again. I've seen bits and pieces, but I can't officially say I've seen it because I have not sat down and watched start to finish, and partially because I haven't, I thought there were more than even two different releases.
I think there is more than two versions.
I never knew where to start.
Well, here's the thing. So when I was introduced to Blade Runner, also in college, it was actually part of an English course I was in, but it was all detective fiction. So it was all like Sherlock Holmes. It was, oddly enough, a Batman comic book. It was Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. And then it was Blade Runner. Now, The voiceover narration, which, by the way, the studios forced upon the movie, is actually typical of the genre for what they were considering it to be a detective movie that is set in the future. But when you take that
like
out,
the Maltese Falcon, is
the Maltese Falcon, or I was trying to think of one of the. Of course, I watched this last week, and I can't remember the name, but it was a Robert Mitchum movie, middle of the 70s. He made a sequel to it called The Big Sleep, and I cannot remember for the life of me the one. He was Philip Marlowe, and it was Sylvester Stallone before he hit it big. He had a non-speaking role in this thing, and anyway, had the good narration, all this stuff, but. Anyway, my point gets to be, you put that narration in there, and it takes that sense of wonderment from a sci-fi film, but it does make it a detective movie. However, you take that thing out, and all of a sudden, it is a sci-fi classic. And you know what? Because they just let you wonder what is the off-world colonies? I have no idea, but it just keeps on going that way. And I think that's one of the best examples that you can find both versions, and you can look at and see what you prefer, and I prefer the wonderment. Anyway, so just mentioning...
Well, I think even Moorcock in his article was saying that, these decisions that Kubrick made were, the right decisions and probably attribute, and are what contributed to the success of the film.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt, man. Without a doubt.
Even though Clarke was his friend, but Clarke was happy with the music. I mean, he had to be. Probably...
It brought him success.
Yeah.
Sold more books of his than he probably ever would have sold.
Yeah, and he was able to write 3 sequels.
Exactly.
And then make another film.
Yep.
Well, why don't we make our conclusory statements and our star ratings? Want me to start it off?
Yeah.
If you want, go ahead.
Lead the charge.
I'm going to give this, which is probably no surprise, 5 stars. And I guess, it's a must-see movie. It holds up. I mean, I feel like almost silly for saying that because, of course, it holds up. But I don't remember when I saw it the first time. I don't even know if I saw it completely the first time or if just watching it recently was the first time. But I was watching even the psychedelic effects and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, this is pretty impressive. And the clarity of the scenes and the gravity effects, whether they were using wires or they were using their elaborate centrifuge on stage. It was still kind of like, oh, how did they do that, And I've seen modern films do these things with different techniques and stuff like that. But you just feel all the weight behind this, all the effort behind it, all the genius behind it, all the collaboration behind this. I mean, I don't know if this is an apt comparison, but I think Kubrick wanted this to be a poetic gesture, and he compared it to music, and I've heard other people compare it to music and stuff like that. But I've heard this story about when Jimi Hendrix came on the scene in England, and there was some night where he was at a bar, or maybe it was several nights, I don't know which, and these other famous guitarists all saw him playing. Jimmy Page was in attendance, and I think Jimmy Page, but a bunch of people, and just blew everyone away. I think that's what this movie was. When this movie came on the scene, it just blew everyone away.
Oh yeah.
And when you watch it now, you can see why.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel dated.
No, not at all. You see the technology, not the graphics, but the special effects they still look legit. You look at some older sci-fi stuff and you can see, all the granular, the gradation of film. You can see all the bad cuts and stuff like that. But
yeah,
this, I attribute that entirely to Kubrick's attention to detail. He's just so very anal about it looking just right.
Yeah, when I was researching this, I could see the effort that went into it because you see him going to NASA to watch a space, to check out a space probe or whatever.
Yeah,
and he's watching these documentaries that are made by in collaboration with scientists to make these real depiction. He chooses Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer who's got a degree in physics, to collaborate on this.
Right.
It's in some ways it's no wonder this was such a huge success. Right from the get-go, he's trying to really go at this full in every detail, and he's pulling out all the stops.
Yeah.
You got to see it. Everyone should see this film. And I would recommend reading the book afterwards. I guess if you're just a casual observer and you liked it enough and you didn't love it, yeah, maybe skip the book. But if you loved it, I think read the book too.
Yeah, I agree.
But Dole, how many stars would you give it?
Without a doubt, 5 stars, man. It's one of my favorite films. I've seen it at least a dozen, maybe more times throughout my life. Every time I see it, it still impresses me. I was really skeptical this go around because I hadn't seen it for several years now. And when you asked me to do that and participate on this particular podcast, I was a little hesitant. I was like, man, I haven't watched his film in a long time, and I love Kubrick, and I'm hoping I'm not going to be disappointed watching it now after being exposed to such newer, like so much has changed in the world of CGI and just in general special effects since the last time I've seen this film. I mean, in the last 5 years, things have gotten out of control. Like,
does it taint your viewing of older stuff?
Well, that's what I was afraid of going back to watch it.
But does it usually?
Usually meaning just other films?
Well, yeah, like, I mean, generally when I watch older films, I know they're going to be different, and it doesn't bother me. Some people it might bother. They'll be like, oh.
It really depends, Ryan, because if the film has some level of maybe tasteful campiness to it, where I can forgive that, and it doesn't matter so much. But if it's like that realism is the lack of being able to see it as real, is gonna, I guess, deprecate the interpretation of the film. Like if it's like a serious genre like this, serious film like this, I can't forgive that. Like, for instance, like when you guys did Lair of the White Worm, right? You know, I can forgive that because it's kind of a cheesy horror film, right?
And it always was.
And it always was, and it was never going to be, groundbreaking story. It's just a vampire thing, This is groundbreaking storytelling. So I was a little nervous going back to watch
Higher
it
stakes.
again. Higher stakes indeed, yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about mankind and just some global stuff here, serious stuff. So philosophical stuff. So like going back to it, not seeing it for even 5 years, I was a little nervous putting it in the DVD player and watching it and seeing like, I hope this is going to be good. And sure enough, I was impressed. I was just like blown away again, watching it again, still blown away. And even like, seeing how they depicted everything, how the ships were controlled, how the ships looked even didn't bother me. Like it was like still seemed really futuristic, really like nothing we've ever seen created yet, So yeah, I mean, that's just man, hats off to somebody who's able to do that. Like how the film is, 50 years old now, nearly? I mean, geez, that's like impressive,
Came out in 1968.
Yeah, man, that's super impressive.
All right. Rich, what about you? How many stars?
Well, I give it 5 out of 5 smashed tapir skulls. So that's my rating. So I'm keeping it down to earth here.
Was it warthogs in the book?
It definitely was. Actually, that was a comment I had in my back pocket going on. Is I was kind of curious. Maybe do you think tapirs were the only animal tame enough to work with like the gorilla actors, or do you think they thought they were prehistoric looking? I
think they were. That's why I would have chosen, because I'm like, these are not going to be as familiar with Western audiences, and they look weirder and more prehistoric. And I don't know scientifically if they're more prehistoric like alligators or what.
Oh, I don't know. Anyway, there was a definite choice, but it was just kind of funny because, this obviously was not the teeming savanna that they were referring to in the books and all that. So I was just, anyway. But no, this movie is a classic. It is worth seeing. You're not required to like it. I mean, like if the ending turns you off, I get it. Because, hey man, it goes off the rails. I mean, like, and such. So I could totally get that, but you need to appreciate the artistry that went into it and such. So again, I can't speak highly enough about the movie.
All right, there you have it, folks. That's our podcast. So, Dole, why don't you give the website for your band again?
Sure. Yes. My band is Theurgy, and it's TheUrgy, and our website is theurgytransmissions.bandcamp.com.
Okay. And then do you want to put a different track on this to preview?
Yeah, let's see. What would be monolithic? Why don't we... let's listen to this one. This is called Dreamcatcher.
All right. Rich, do you want to plug your Christmas train again?
No, my Christmas train is fine. Coming 2018.
Okay. All right. Come visit us on the web. We're at www.nodeodorant.com. You can find the podcast on all your podcast catchers, on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, YouTube. We're on there, Stitcher, Google Play, all the fun places you can find podcasts. Like our podcast, rate it, write reviews, and enjoy. So until next time, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See you such a long time.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode, or to read our show notes and find us on social media, visit nodeodorant.com. For more information on Ryan Sean O'Reilly and his various works of fiction, visit ryanseanoreilly.com. The theme music for this podcast was written by John Doyle from the band I Decline. You can visit him at i-decline.com. Voiceover for this podcast was provided by me, Margaret O'Reilly. Well, that concludes our episode. We hope you've learned a lot. Again, thanks for listening to our show. And always remember, there is no deodorant in outer space.
Test 1, test 2, test 3. Let's hear.
Am I test 3? Are you test 3? Who's test 3?
Keep talking.
Test.
Hello.
All right. For some reason, everyone's quieter, but I think we're all talking quieter because the lights are on.
Oh, we're not.
I like the lights on.
All right. We're gonna have to record this one with lights on.
If you want an active participant, I'd recommend it.
But
That's what she said.
When we get to the Stargate sequence, the lights are going down,
She said that too.
and the pumpkin lights are going on.
I don't know what that would mean. That is not dirty to me. Please keep your comments dirty. We want double entendre at all times.
Let's listen to Hiding Your Face in the Wall.
Is that the one with the jug and the washboard?
Did we do that one on Solaris?
Did we? Oh, yeah, maybe we did. I don't know. Okay. Well,
What's the one about the fairy mound? We did that one on Solaris.
that was that one.
Yes,
Yeah,
so we did that one.
Well, then let's do...
Nice. I appreciate the fairy mound references. Sweet.
Wait till you hear the song.
Well, I'm going to have to.
I can play it for you.
Did we do that one too on Solaris?
I don't know if we did.
Dude, quit picking on him.
And if we don't do Dreamcatcher, what are we going to listen to?
How about we do... Jeez, man. My brain's fried right now.